in Phunware data?
Sure. Well, Phunware data is an interesting evolution of probably when we first met. And if you think about an analogy of Facebook, where Facebook has built probably 1.5 billion users through 5 applications, really. 4 if we're being really critical. But Facebook, Messenger, WhatsApp, Instagram, obviously 2 are purchased, 2 are organic. And now they've added, I think, Moments, but we'll see how big it gets. But really, they've tried to use those 5 applications as a vertical walled garden to create one-on-one relationship with people around the world at scale. Phunware has really accomplished a different version of the same thing, but using 5,000 applications instead of 5, and being a horizontal slice through all the vertical walled gardens of not just Facebook and Twitter, but groups like Apple and Google and Microsoft and others. So what we did is, whether people were using our platform to build out use cases and feature sets and capability within their application portfolios, really the mobile applications and the experiences that you might provide, what we actually found is that whether you were building these applications yourself using our platform, whether you were licensing a pre-integrated solution like a traveler experience for the airports, or a shopping experience for the malls, or a fan experience for the stadium in the form of application portfolios, or even these live event applications like the Olympic Games or the Grammys or the Oscars, or flagship applications like the identity of CBS or NBC on mobile. If we could reach people, whether they were building applications themselves, licensing a right to use ours, or helping build these big live event or flagship applications, we effectively created 650 million Phunware IDs that resulted in 650 million monthly active users that we could reach for one-to-one targeting indoors and outdoors all around the world.
So I was just coming from a little earlier today. Sysomos had a webinar and trying to understand kind of the relationship between paid and organic in the social environment. But it would seem that what you're doing really takes this further by being more behavioral.
Yeah, and it's not just behavior. You get into contextual awareness. You get into interests of what users like or don't like, what they want to be engaged with, what they don't, what brands they care about, which ones they don't. And so the way we think about it is, it's like having a global real-time focus group indoors and out with contextual and location-aware applications that not only know all the things about what you're doing and who you are, but they dynamically can change the value that you present to a brand depending on where you're at. If I go to Starbucks and you go to Starbucks, we each have a different value based on how much we buy. When we go to the airport, we probably have a different value depending on frequent flyer, business traveler or not, whether we go to lounges or not. When we go to Home Depot, the same thing happens. Most brands, we see that 20% of their audience represents 80% of their revenue. And what we want to do is to enable brands in the virtual and physical world alike to be able to know who was there, what they were doing, what they liked, and what their value was to that brand, so they could engage them with what they believed would be the most appropriate engagement for who they are and where they're at.
So what you're selling is access to a lot of data, what we might call big data, and I'm guessing there's some sort of a dashboard that users access all this data from?
Well, so if you think of users being the application users, for us, they're just doing what they naturally do. They walk around, they go places, they do things, they engage with their applications of choice. All of our relationships are business to business. So we focus on the Fortune 5000, and when we target those businesses, a lot of times they're going from B to B, ultimately to C. And the users consuming these experiences on the application portfolios, they ultimately become essential to what's actually happening in their daily lives. But what's going on behind the scenes is that if we see your device show up, and that device shows up on a network, and we've never seen it before, we'll create a Phunware ID unique to that. And then we'll start trying to follow you in the physical and virtual worlds and say, oh, we've met you at this airport, we met you at this mall, we've met you in the NBC Sports Live Extra application. Wherever we meet you, we just try to capture more and more information about you. And you're correct, it's kind of like the intersection of mobile, meets the cloud, meets big data. And at that intersection, it gives you really unique insights. So in our case, in the last 12 months, the database we have tied to these 650 million monthly active users is about 700 terabytes, which has doubled from 350 terabytes 12 months ago. So we're getting about 70 user event records per user per month. And this is just what you're naturally doing with what you engage in like. And we capture that information, always based on what the user wants us to know. Users can decide in each application whether they want their location known or not known. They can decide whether they want to engage in their loyalty programs or not. Nobody has to get on Southwest Airlines or American Airlines and decide they want to earn free flights, but many of us do. So as you're making those decisions as a user, empowered to say, I want to opt in for these different offerings, much like free Wi-Fi at Starbucks, free Wi-Fi at an airport, then we say, great, here's a Phunware ID. We met you in this first application, and now everywhere we see you again through any application portfolio, whether those are the horizontal platform that people are building on, the vertical solutions, or these specialized live event or flagship applications, we get to know more about you. And then even if you have an application portfolio, let's say you're a large media company and you have 30 million users on your app, that's great, but that's only 5% of what Phunware would see on a monthly basis. So all of them get advantages to take their data, bounce it against our data, and use their granular segments of how they want to demographically segment their audience based on value and perception of their user base. We can help give them more insights of those same segments so they can get even more granular and more targeted and more accurate, which then creates additional conversion yield and intensifies the success of the applications, because now we can say, great, should you get content? Should you get a social stream? Should you get information? Should you get something like loyalty points or a digital offer or a physical offer or anything in between? And so what we're finding right now is that we're able to help these brands know who is there, what they like, what they don't, and then give them what they think they would like so that you have delighted end users who are excited at that high value touch point between this brand and this anytime, anywhere audience through their applications.
So if I understand correctly, a customer might be a Starbucks customer, and because of this ID, you will also know that that customer sometimes shops at this department store, let's say. And that data might then have utility, might have a value proposition.
Yes, and so what can happen is, take an example of ride-sharing companies. Pick your favorite one. What actually would happen is they may want to build their audience of ride-sharing users, so they engage Phunware. Well, they engage Phunware not to build the experience for ride-sharing, to facilitate the creation or the building of those applications, but in their case, they may come to us with media buying to reach segments within our 650 million monthly active users. And to your point, well, if I've met you at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, Miami International Airport, I've also met you because you're an Amex Platinum loyalty card user, and I've also realized that you're on Boingo Wi-Fi, well, that's likely to be a power business traveler segment, and that would be very advantageous to a ride-sharing company or a rental car company or anyone that provides on-the-fly hotel services. So these are what we can get, very rich data in real time that's natural because we're not forcing anything. We're just letting people be who they are, use what they like, and they're walking around with a device in their pocket everywhere they go.
So that then gets your company very much into the digital advertising space then, right?
Well, we don't really think about things in the context of just digital advertising. I kind of jokingly call it the Scarlet A. We do focus on engaging, managing, and monetizing. So the engagement side would be, what's the experience based on the use cases, feature sets you create. That leads into, okay, now I need an application portfolio branded for that flagship live event or physical venue. And then what you do is you say, okay, great. All that is there. What comes next? Well, you have to have a system to manage the interactions with those audiences and communities, consuming the applications that have that experience. And you're correct, then you get into monetization. Well, monetization to us, advertising is just one of many, many things. Marketing automation is another. Physical and digital commerce is another. So it really just comes down to, if I'm a retailer, I want to probably drive in-application, online, and in-store purchases. If you're a gaming company, you probably want, virtual goods purchased. If you're a hospital, you really actually don't care about any of that. What you care about is that you want to get scheduling right. Because if the right patient with the right doctor is not with the right nurse and the right equipment in the right room at the right time, they can't invoice Medicaid, Medicare, or insurance, and that is an $8 million loss per hospital per year on scheduling. So monetization means very different things. Advertising is definitely one item you can use to put the right offer or the right stimulus in front of users. But often it'd be like, you could walk into a certain store and you walk in front of an Xbox display and it triggers content. And it's the trailer for the latest Call of Duty or something tied to Pokemon Go since everyone loves it. It doesn't really matter what it is, but we do look at monetization much more broadly than just advertising.
As an academic, of course, I'm always looking for how do I teach this to my students? Are there going to be opportunities? Some platforms offer educational licensing for limited amounts of data. Are there going to be potentially down the road some academic opportunities for people to see this at work?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So when we first started Phunware, we actually didn't realize we'd ever have a big data offering or licensed data sets. We just sort of stumbled upon the idea that, wow, we can literally reach every connected device touching a network in the world if we use applications as the conduit to reach these people. I would say that right now we've been focusing on the commercial engagements to help brands preserve or enhance the monetization of these audiences and communities because 70% of the world's internet traffic is now mobile. I think when you and I first met, it was barely over 2% of the world's internet traffic being mobile. Ironically, though, on the spend level, it's probably only about not even 10% of the allocation is being spent on mobile and marketing budgets, even though 70% of the traffic is there. So when you see Mary Meeker talk about these big gaps, we see it daily because the Fortune 5000 is underspending by 7 to 1. Now, I don't know that they have to go to 1 to 1, but it probably seems reasonable to be 2 to 1. They should probably be spending 35% of that budget instead of the full thing. In terms of academia, I guess we'll have to figure out whether there's kind of a creative GitHub kind of model where people could take data sets, experiment in a safe place, and if they're using it for certain purposes, they can do it at their heart's convenient. If they want to do it for commercial, there becomes a license. If they want to use it to take out through their own distribution or enhance their own social graph or something, we might have to think about it. But we don't have a current model for that. Mm-hmm. But in general, our data we've tried to make available in as simple a way as we could for corporate America, but maybe that works for academia, I don't know, under a grant. But we license all of our data at $15,000 a month for one region of the world, and we do it at $25,000 a month for the entire world, which gives you access to, really, it's about evenly split now, 325 million in the United States, very saturated in terms of population. 325 million is rest of world.
Well, one of the things that has come up on our campus is our library is increasingly interested in providing access to data that students might use in their research. And so while the kind of commercial pricing doesn't work for most academic units, at the university system level, sometimes some of that can be a potential collaboration between academe and business, because if it's a product that the marketing faculty and the communication faculty and maybe political science faculty and others are interested in at undergraduate and graduate research levels, then there potentially could be some interest there.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair point, and it's been interesting just to kind of discover strange things like. Had our first hedge fund that showed up, right, and wanted to talk because everybody wants to have better information about the markets. And that became very natural because when you really think about it, we can see traffic patterns. We can see usage patterns. We can see geography. So when we were in the fourth quarter of last year, even in the rush to the holiday season, we probably could have predicted with reasonable accuracy which retailers were going to meet or exceed results and which ones were not, because the world was telling us by just their own behavior, and we could see that behavior. So haven't really quite thought about where this will go, but clearly there's been patterns of people using satellites to shoot Walmarts, and based on the number of open spaces, they've come up with algorithms per store as to how to predict revenue and earnings. This is probably a different format of that. And I think you've seen this with Foursquare. They started posting what they thought companies would do in advance to try to prove the value of the insight of the data they're getting when people show up at physical locations. So I think it's going to be a lot of evolution, and especially as it relates to the markets, everybody wants an advantage. In academia, I think there's an endless array of probably what you could do with the kind of information that we have and the behavioral patterns that result.
It reminds me a little bit of visits I've made to Bloomberg News in New York and their Chicago offices,
Right.
where, the news organization certainly has been an important function in their brand identity, but a lot of their money is made by just the data intelligence that they have. And a lot of their clients are looking for that kind of insight into how something is going to affect their business.
Yeah, and I think we actually saw in our initial customers on this, it was a lot of the traditional old print media businesses, because everything they learned from the internet was great. They have their physical world subscriptions. When you go from the internet to mobile, they got a little bit of information from the mobile web because cookies were available for the traditional and the mobile web. But unfortunately, 90% of all of the mobile internet traffic is actually in applications, not in browsers. So a lot of these traditional companies, they might have 55, 60, 70 million users per month at their sites across their print publications, magazines, newspapers. All of a sudden, they were blind. They could not see where are these users going, what are they doing, and the data that we offer almost is equivalent. If you'll excuse the analogy, it's a bit like selling sight to a blind person, because you literally have no idea where all of this internet traffic and mobile web traffic through browsers is going. But meanwhile, 90%, which is now 63% of all internet traffic in the world, is in native applications.
Yeah, last week in Minneapolis, Edelman Digital was talking about their emerging model, has kind of come around to search plus social. But in your way of thinking about it, it's broader than just the traditional definition of search, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. And I think the other part that's going to be very interesting to watch as time goes forward, how media buying, a multi-$100 billion industry around the world, dominated predominantly by dollars going to Facebook and Google, sometimes specific to search, sometimes not. But when you look at the dominant amount of media buying that's being consumed, a disproportionate amount, almost 70% of it goes to Google and Facebook. Well, the interesting part of that is that everyone is looking for alternatives outside of the vertical walled gardens of Google and Facebook. They still want to meet users, but it's sort of like Apple. If you're a brand, you don't just want to meet someone who has an iPhone. They want to meet people on Android and iPhone and Windows and anything else, because they need to reach the entire audience, not just those tied to the Apple ecosystem or the Google ecosystem or Facebook. And what I think you're going to see happen is that the level of data science and the level of engagement that we can capture and truly understand is going to blow up a multi-$100 billion media buying industry, because traditional agencies of record have been able to live in the world of the opaque for so long that they have nothing to actually provide the tool sets on what's the ROI. It was better to say, hey, there's 10 million subscriptions to our newspaper, and you have no idea who got it that day in print or digital. You have no idea whether they really looked at your section of the paper or your page or your ad, or if they did anything about it. Same with billboards, often the same for radio or television. So what we're finding, because we didn't come out of that industry, we've created tool sets that show brands literally, and we're optimizing this for the balance of the year, and we'll probably launch in the first quarter. We're going to have a big old set of spotlight tools to show how much agencies are stealing from their customers. And this is going to be outrageously unpopular, because things like routing media buying to groups that are giving kickbacks, or they're called rebates, I'm sorry. They're getting routed. They're having people that are routing things illegally to affiliate networks that aren't supposed to. They're having people that are routing things through safe sites to reconcile on banned sites. The incentives for click fraud and the incentives for media buying manipulation is off the charts. You saw that Android as an operating system was hacked out of China not too long ago. And the folks that did that were getting $10,000 per day. Well, if you can make $300,000 a month and do that for 3, 4, 5 months in China or the Philippines or the Ukraine or somewhere else in the world, you could just retire. So when you're talking about $100 billion media buying, that has always survived because no one knew what or how any of this stuff happened, I think you're going to see some radical changes. For instance, we have a customer that for every $10 million of media buying they spend, at least $1.5 million is stolen from them, from their agency. That's kind of some real money. And that's just the simple stuff. As you dig deeper, what we believe is we're going to help Fortune 5000 companies and their boards say, life isn't perfect, the world isn't perfect, but let's us understand, if I'm Coca-Cola, if I am the largest brands in the world, Procter & Gamble, how much money is being spent and how much of it is in the perfect versus the imperfect world. And then if we know this, can we make smarter decisions to disintermediate folks that aren't providing value in the middle? Because often the brand is buying from an agency, the agency is outsourcing to someone, and the outsourcing person might come to Phunware. Why? Because they have no technology platform or reach to deliver it. So it's almost like defense contractors with someone with a GSA taking their piece off the middle and then floating it through. And for us, we're like, well, if that brand would just work with us directly, it's more economical, our margins go up, they get much more visibility, and they cut out all the people in the middle that aren't providing any value.
So you aim to be a disruptor in the industry then?
Yeah, so I have a kind of a 100 plan, but that's 100 million of transactions, 100 million of subscriptions, and then blow up the $100 billion media buying industry so that Phunware can be an alternative. When people think about Google, Facebook, then there's Phunware. And what we believe is that if we are open, candid, and transparent, and we show people what's happening, that's going to be very unpopular for those that have been doing this. There's some very large groups in the world. Some have wonderful British accents. They've even been knighted by the Queen herself. They probably have a better accent than me, and they're more impeccably dressed for sure. But they're stealing over and over and over. And they live in a world that the less their customers know, the more they can extract. The more they can route buying to their preferred providers, the more they can get rebates. And this has got to stop. This is ugliness at its finest, to the tune of several $100 billion a year around the world. And I think those doing it right will have nothing to hide. And those not doing it right are going to be scared to death, because we're going to put a spotlight on it and let brands manage it. And we're working with one of the biggest private companies in the world to show definitively exactly how bad this problem is, productize it, and then hopefully we're going to see those folks start disintermediating their media buying, and they'll come to someone like us they'll trust that they have the tools to track, see where it's going, and it's being done on the level, because nobody is going to stop fraudulent attempts. If everyone could stop fraud, American Express, Visa, and MasterCard wouldn't have to have a department worrying about bad transactions or theft, but they do.
In terms of Phunware value, is it wrong to say that the geolocation, that geofencing, the data that is a part of the fact that we all carry mobile phones, that's really a big asset in what's in your data, or is it something else that I'm missing?
No, I think you got it right on the head. I mean, for us, we look at how do we capture information if there's no network and no hardware. When we go indoors, however, outdoors everyone's used to an X and a Y coordinate with longitude, latitude, and GPS. But what happens when you go indoors is usually when everyone goes blind. So what we do is we have direct software linkages into the chips that go into the devices that touch the network, into the high and low density Wi-Fi gear that compose the indoor wireless networks, and even the datacom and telecom layer from the carriers and service providers. So if all of the chips, connected devices, networking gear, and network are the Internet of Things, plus sensors and other, we'd be like the software of things. And the goal in life is to have an X, a Y, and a Z coordinate, indoors and out, so that you can seamlessly transition from GPS to high-density Wi-Fi, to low-density Wi-Fi, to what are called virtual beacons, and then down to physical beacons. Physical beacons will update sub 1 second. Virtual beacons will update sub 3 seconds. The best Wi-Fi in the world will update about every 10 seconds. And in order for you to have that amazing indoor blue dot experience like you're used to in Google or Apple Maps outdoors, you need to have updates to the device and the application sub 1 second. So we've been creating a means to capture Phunware IDs, a database indoors and out, and the beacon, GPS, and Wi-Fi just become conduits that say, okay, is it a 1, 3, or 5 foot geofence? Is it a 3, 5, or 7 meter geofence? Or is it 10, 100, 500 meter geofence? And then you just put workflow, policy enforcement, and data capture specific to those different sizes based on that value. And so that database becomes core to one-to-one indoor-outdoor targeting against those user bases.
Just one last question. Going forward, is it the Internet of Things or something else that we should be most excited about coming down the way in the next, say, 12 months?
Well, 12 months is an interesting thing to say. You know, it's funny that 12 months ago, if you and I had the same discussion, none of us would have said augmented reality or virtual reality. But along came Pokemon Go and radically altered the adoption of something in ways that were profound. Ironically, if you go all the way back to voice over IP, it was actually the launch of Vonage in the United States. Internationally, it was Dialpad and toll arbitrage between Korea and the United States on narrowband 64K connections. It wasn't even wideband or broadband, but it was when Vonage showed up in the United States. That is when voice over IP adopted en masse because the consumers drove it. And the migration from circuit switching to packet switching accelerated to such an extent that Nortel didn't survive, and Alcatel and Lucent struggled, and Ericsson and Nokia and all the others were suddenly selling off or going away. This time around, I think virtual reality and augmented reality are going to get a lot of attention because of the intersection of the virtual and physical worlds. I think it's fair to say that the Internet of Things is going to dramatically accelerate as all these sensors and devices touch the network, and then you have applications to take advantage of that information to do something with it. That's going to take some time to have the applications that touch into all those devices in some coherent application experience. Other things that no one really talk about, I think, that are going to suddenly pop out. Think of a search engine being reimagined, because we're used to using Google and other, Baidu and other search engines for the physical world. What if you start indexing the virtual world that overlays the physical world so that you can find things through applications that you can see? It could be a beautiful graffiti art virtual drawing on the side of the convention center that was sponsored by Coca-Cola on behalf of an application. Or we're doing South by Southwest here in Austin. we decide to have fun, and we're going to have a circuit of pink bunnies that are going to jump and run throughout the city, and you have to see it through your augmented reality, and then overlay to experiences that guide you into specials at restaurants and bars. And that makes no damn sense at all. But the reality is now that people are getting an understanding that they can look through their phone, experience something that is there but really isn't. It also becomes very helpful for cities, like the city of Houston, getting ready to lead into the Super Bowl in February. Well, Houston, and you could create a virtual experience where you can not use real graffiti, but everybody visiting the Super Bowl and having the fan experience can do things. And if you ever want to go back and relive the Super Bowl in time of what it was like to be there, you now have a historical reference of an entirely artificially created world that was unique to the Super Bowl. And so I think what you're going to see is these crazy, interesting implementations that are going to move technology forward. And I don't think there's any panacea or silver bullet. I think it's more, think about waves of computing. There's the PC wave, so you had Apple and Microsoft. You had the client server wave, I'll call that Oracle. You had the internet wave, I'll give Google credit for that. Then you went into the social wave, well, there's Facebook. I think we're at the mobile wave. That's where I see Phunware. And this mobile and multi-screen wave, we're barely getting started. It feels like smartphones have been around forever. Well, that's not really true. I mean, think about 9 out of 10 phones in a place like the Philippines are prepaid phones. Here we call those burner phones, right? Most people don't, there's only 3 smartphones in that same market. So some of this stuff is going to be like a spaceship landing in foreign countries that have yet to even adopt smartphones, yet alone tablets or smart televisions. Because right now, smart televisions are not iOS and Android. They need to be. They're kludgy HTML web interfaces. It's actually the worst experience for the most beautiful screen. We actually sometimes put frames that do IR and convert traditional smart televisions into a touchscreen. Because kids will go up and swipe and it doesn't work. They'll pinch zoom, it doesn't work. They're like, hey, this is broken. Can we get a new television? And then when you get into in-car infotainment systems, don't forget, those are 8 to 10 year cycles, make, model, manufacturer. I had fun. I got a BMW i8, and I had like a BlackBerry connection, and then an old iPhone connection that isn't even for the new one. And you literally just go, wow, this is like one of the most advanced cars that they've just launched. But it goes back to that 8 to 10 year cycle for CarPlay and all these other things to even become relevant. So we're barely getting started. The next 12 months, I think fundamentally it's going to be an iOS and Android world at the operating system level. And then all these devices are going to start morphing into that sort of technology. And the rest of this is a matter of how do you create the best experience and the best application portfolios for the biggest audiences, even though there's a 7-to-1 gap in budget allocation, even though on that 10% being allocated, they're having 5 and 10x return above what they're used to in other channels.
Is there anything else that I should know about Phunware data that I haven't asked you about?
No, I think that we look at it from a user base. We believe in 3 years we'll have more active users than Facebook, and that's a pretty bold thing to say. But if you think about
when are you going public? I want to know.
Well, who knows? I'm one that believes all companies should go public a lot faster. I think companies wait too long. You and I could talk a long time. There's only been 9 IPOs this year. That's insanity to me. Like, why? Right? There are so many great companies that could and should go public. And the idea, I think Technology Crossover Ventures just suggested, and I support, is what in the world are all these companies waiting for? There are so many funds with money and there's no inventory for them to buy. The public is craving new opportunities, and they're just not there. Like, look at Twilio. So Twilio is doing fantastic. It's a wonderful company. But when you look at it, I think it's about $60 a share today. I think They were going to price it at a range of 12 to 14. They ended up doing it at 16. It opens at 23, and now it's at 6. 3-4 months later, come on, that's ridiculous. That just means how much money was left on the table because it was wildly underpriced pursuant to value. But then you have things like Marketo's getting bought off the public markets by private equity. If you're a small cap growth manager, where in the world do you invest? There is no supply. There's nothing there. So I believe that it should be more like, Microsoft, Amazon, Cisco, Dell, Intel, $300, $400, $500 million in valuation. You float 50, 75, $100 million of stock, and then you grow. I mean, going public is not the end. That's just a financing and branding event. And good companies executing over the next decade will do fine. This idea that we have to wait for the election uncertainty. We have to wait for interest rate certainty. We have to wait for refugee uncertainty. Is China going to be a soft or a hard landing? Ironically, who the hell cares? You and I are going to wake up, we're going to get dressed, we're going to go to work, life moves forward. If events happen that are so catastrophic to our lives, we're all going to have a lot more to worry about than, this idea of, is there a window? I think there's always a window, and there should be. And I think a lot more companies should get out because, in our world of data, it's amazing to see what you can do when you give people what they want, whenever they want it, wherever they're at, in their own selfish interest. And when you do that, everybody wins.
As my sort of neighbor Warren Buffett likes to tell people around these parts, if it's a good business and it's well managed, it's going to do fine.
Sure. And if you're trying to go public, no one's trying to go public to be done. You're going public for the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years. So who cares what the near-term month or quarter looks like? The reality is, what does the next 3 years and 5 years and 10 years look like? Now everybody thinks they know everything about Amazon. Don't you remember how not too long ago it was the online bookstore, right? Or how about the first time you heard of these disappearing videos? Or how about the first time you heard of this random thing with 140 characters to do microblogs? It's fascinating in retrospect how people view things. And I think that sometimes it's okay to be the first. When I think of Salesforce as a sales and marketing cloud, I think of Facebook as a social cloud. Phunware is the mobile and multi-screen cloud. All we try to do is help Fortune 5,000 companies on a business-to-business relationship to engage, manage, and monetize all their audiences through applications. And if they want to do it themselves, we give them a platform in the cloud. If they don't want anything to do with trying to figure out how to be an amazing baker with all the ingredients we give them, then great, let's let them eat cake and we can give them vertical solutions that they can just take off the shelf and go to market. Or if they want to create amazing live events or flagship experiences, hey, we can do that too. So I think the reality is there's going to be more people using mobile tomorrow than today. That's going to continue for the foreseeable future. There will be more people using applications tomorrow than today. And as we do this, we're just going to expect how to consume all these things from our favorite brands, our favorite places, and I don't see that changing any more than I don't see the future of Amazon changing from let me give you great prices with a wonderful selection with same-day delivery. 10 years from now, you're not going to say, make it more expensive, give me less, and extend the time I have to wait to get it. And I don't think that's any different in what we're seeing in the digital world with mobile.
Well, thanks for taking this much time today. It's always fascinating to catch up with you, and I think it's going to be an interesting area to watch going forward.
Thank you very much. I always enjoy seeing you, and I'll look forward to seeing you again in person when schedules and geography are a little more cooperative.
Yeah, I understand the Mobile Me conference, I think, is going to be happening in Chicago and San Francisco this year, but I'm not quite sure about the details of it.
Yeah, it seems to be almost like a virtual conference, so I'm not quite sure how they're going to do that.
Yeah, so I may just tap into that virtually rather than physically this year, but at any rate, maybe we'll intersect at some other point down the road.
All right, well, I look forward to staying in touch, and I'll also try to keep in mind if there's something we could do in the academic realm with the data. There is a local Austin company called Data.World, which is a guy I know, Brett Hurt, and some of the team from HomeAway that had done Bazaar Voice before. So they're doing a big, massive open source data that sort of resembles GitHub, where for academic use, anybody can share data sets and information and collaborate and explore new things. And then I think if they want to use it for commercial purposes, it has a separate licensing model. But you can check that out. That's I've never really thought about whether we should partner with them in some way to provide more data sets and how the business model would work. But they're definitely focusing on academics as a means to stimulate usage and cross-cultivation of data sets.
Cool. I'll look into that.
Awesome.
Great.
Good to see you.
Yep. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.